So we would next like to introduce our one of our keynote speakers, Dr. Lydia Ocasio-Stoutenburg. Dr. Lydia Ocasio-Stoutenburg is a program manager at the Step Up AT program, Assistive Technology program in Miami, Florida, where she focuses on research and community engagement. She is a qualitative researcher, a parent, and a community advocate for children with disabilities and their families. She received her PhD in special education from the University of Miami, and she holds master's degrees in biology and bioethics. She is also the co-author of 2 books on caregiver advocacy across cultures, languages, disabilities, and other social identity. And I'll actually put a link to those books in the chat here. I met Dr. Ocasio-Stoutenburg through the Association of University Centers on Disability, where I became familiar through her work with the Multicultural Council. And it's really just our privilege to have her here to talk about the importance of addressing intersectionality and different aspects of identity as we do this really important advocacy work. So Dr. Ocasio-Stoutenburg, thank you so much for being here with us, and feel free to take it away.
Thank you so much, Matt. It was a wonderful introduction. I'm very honored to be here and to share with you about intersectionality. And I say share because I don't want to sit here and lecture, even though I do that in my daytime hours, but I don't want that to be what you take away from me. I just hope that I can share new perspectives with you today as you go about doing your work within your community, within your families, within those you encounter. So again, like I said, my name is Dr. Lydia Ocasio-Stoutenburg, and all those titles I carry, but my #1 job is mom, right? So as you can see in my title slide, this is my little one. His name is Isaiah, and Isaiah has Down syndrome, and this was many years ago on March 21st, where we celebrate Down Syndrome Day, and he has his crazy socks on. And I chose this picture to be framing my presentation today because he's looking in the mirror. And when he looks in the mirror, he feels joy. He's laughing, he's smiling, right? So that is something that I want everyone to feel yourself as you work with families, as you talk with other people, to feel that joy, to look in yourself in the mirror and feel that happiness and let that radiate outward. And unfortunately, we live in a world where we don't always feel that joy, or others don't make us feel that way. But I really want to center that joy because it's really important, and that's probably our most powerful asset. Let me go ahead. What are the things that are meaningful to you? And that's what I want to start with. I always ask families that I work with, what matters to you? What do you want? So it looks different, right? Across the lifespan. You look at childhood, maybe you have some goals. You want to receive your education. So where do you go to school, where you work, where you play, where you interact? You also want to look at what you want out of family, out of your relationships, out of your community. All of those things matter. Friendships. So it doesn't have to be just structured goals. I mean, we think about special education and the IEP process and those kind of goals, or goals for therapy, things like that, that so many of our families and individuals with disabilities are so accustomed to. But just what do you want? What do you want out of life? What do you care about? I think those are really, really important. Next, I want to take us to encountering ourselves. So that's what I want to frame with, is our inner work. What are the things we look at inside? As Matt mentioned, I've written 2 books on advocacy for families of children with disabilities and families with children, teens, adults. And I really wanted to center family voices. So that's something that we don't really have, is looking at advocacy through the family lens, through the individual lens. What does that look like, instead of being told what to do, right? And so this is probably something I am most proud of, is really spending time with families, going to them to doctor office visits, going to them to schools, in meetings, as the kids get older, going to cheerleading practices, going to church with my families, and really spending time with them to look at what does their life look like in every setting, and what does advocacy look like in those settings. So here is a picture of me and my co-author, Beth Harry, who's now retired, but spent 30 years in special education. She had written a memoir of her daughter, who passed away when she was 6 years old. Her daughter had cerebral palsy. And you'll see above my picture is a picture of my daughter and my son, Isaiah. I'm a mother of 5, and my youngest has the Down syndrome diagnosis. But that's just one part of him. There's so many different parts of him and how he's contributed to our families. But our own identities are important, how we show up as mothers. So I wrote just a list here. It's not an exhaustive list, but mothers, we're Black mothers. She's Afro-Caribbean, I'm Afro-Latina. We're in special education. We do qualitative research. We do ethnographic methodologies, which is a really fancy word, meaning we really look at cultures and how people view processes and systems through their own lens, through their own experiences of culture and their identity. We do a process called cultural reciprocity, which I'll talk about in a minute. We do family studies, so we look at families across, especially special education. We do something called disability counter narratives, meaning there's always a story about disability, which tends to be very negative. So I do something called counter narratives, meaning I'm going to give you the opposite story. I'm going to give you a positive story. I'm going to give you a strengths-based story. And that's really where I center my work. So what environments do you encounter? And this is really important when we think about advocacy, is where are you going to advocate, right? Where are you going to advocate? You're going to advocate in school? Are you going to advocate doctor's office? Are you going to advocate even in a broader way on the policy level? That's advocacy too, right? Are you going to advocate for your state? There's so many different environments that you're involved in. And school, for example, which I've listed here, is just one of them. You can see how complex the school environment is. There's so many different processes and so many different players and actors. And so families and children are expected to navigate that. You know, it's really challenging. It's really complex. And it can be something that makes you feel like you don't have a lot of power and you don't have a lot of voice. That voice you need to advocate for what you want and for what you need. Remember my first slide when I said what matters to you, what's most meaningful. That's what you're advocating for. Next, our identity matters. So who we are and how we show up. And we have many different identities, right? So our identities are also have to do with our values too. So we can look at the things that matter to us, our values, and how different that might be from the broader culture. Our identities might have to do with our gender, right? Our orientation, our religion, our race, right? Our social class, where we find ourselves, our abilities and disabilities, all those are part of our identities, right? And we may have several one of those. And no one person is identical to another, right? And how we interact. And that's why you see those arrows on this model, because you can see it means that you're interacting. All of these are contributing, right? And we're receiving that, how we show up in the world. So I didn't create this. This came from a professor by the name of James Banks in a book called Multicultural Education. Very important to examine these different cultures. So sometimes these cultures or these identities that we have may come into conflict with the broader culture, with what we call the macro culture. But the unique combination of how we interact with the world is how you bring to any type of person you interact with in any system. So you're going to combine all these cultures, and that's going to make up what we call our cultural identity. So I'm going to talk briefly about something called the cultural reciprocity process. Reciprocity means we're going two ways, two directions, right? So the first step in a cultural reciprocity process, because we want to make sure that our interactions are going both ways, not only are we interacting with those we want to advocate, right, with, but we are also understanding how other people may receive us. And that's a two-way process, whether we are the person who's advocating, the family, whether we're advocating for ourselves, or we're a provider and helping that family access services, or we're a teacher, a healthcare provider. No matter who we are, we have to remember this two-way process. So the first step is asking, how do you feel about this parent, the family, the disability, or the community, right? You want to reflect on your own personal values, right? Your biases, any assumptions that you might have that drive your recommendations. So if you're assuming that, hey, I think that all Latino families share this in common, maybe you're missing something, because maybe it's not what you assume. Maybe this family may not prioritize that. Or just because this is a value to you doesn't mean that this is a value to the family. I usually give this example when I'm teaching. I talk about transition plans. And so sometimes part of our transition may be for independence. But for some cultures, independence doesn't look the same. So we always have to be mindful of who we are speaking with and making sure that we are also taking into account what that family might value. The next thing is you want to invite folks in to question and listen to families' perspectives. So this is a very important step in having dialogues, making sure that we are also listening, asking questions that we don't understand. It's very important to have this type of questioning to say, I'm not sure if I understood what you meant. Did I get that right? To reflect that you're respecting what the person is expressing to you. And just look at those perspectives and listen to them carefully, even if you don't really understand them, and even if you disagree with them. The next important part is to explain the professional perspective. So professionals may have a perspective based on their own expertise, based on how they were trained. Explain that perspective, right? Not saying, hey, I'm the expert here, and you're going to do what I say because I know better. But really explain your point of view. Again, we're sharing power and making sure that we're understanding one another. And finally, in the last step, you want to identify common ground. Develop goals together, and that's what we call collaborative goals. That's a part of being a co-advocate. The next, we're going to talk about encountering disability. Okay? So the key concepts I want to talk about here, and that's really a highlight of today, is to talk about identity intersectionality. We're going to talk about this dilemma of difference and reframe disability. And we're also going to talk about this idea of the norm, labeling and assessment. So here is some work that I did for our books, and we interviewed some parents. This is a couple that we interviewed. It's a child who has a very unique profile. She was born with a genetic translocation, which rendered her eyes non-functional. So she is blind. She also has Down syndrome. There was so much focus on the professionals on her vision that they missed the Down syndrome diagnosis. And what's odd in this situation is that her parents were also working in the disability field. So Down syndrome was very recognizable for them. So they wondered why no one addressed that, right, when giving the diagnosis. She is also biracial. So she's Black, her mother is white Hispanic, and her parents are also same gender. So we are looking at so many different intersections. So just now I mentioned so many identities of this particular family. And they're just a lovely family, wonderful advocates for their daughters. This is identity intersectionality. And I know you see intersectionality a lot in the literature, and people use that word all the time. So I'm showing two pictures to show you what intersectionality is. People think intersectionality is the picture on the left. It's just really nice and neat. And this is where different identities come together. And it's just a really nice picture. But really, that's not true. It's really more like the picture on the right. right? So in the picture on the right, you see chaos, right? You can't get through. And I think that's really projecting the image that I like to bring across is sometimes there are barriers here, even though there are crosswalks and there are roads, sometimes because of this intersection, you can't get through. And this is why it's very important to be mindful of those identities. So what is intersectionality? You'll see it a lot in the literature. You see it a lot, I'm sure, in social media. So people often refer to this and confuse it with having multicultural identity. So we're all of different cultures, right? Our reality is that we live in different cultures and coexist. So our culture is based on where our families come from, right? By race and ethnicity, right? There's also disability culture. Disability has its culture, right? There's deaf culture, right? There's a culture, a microculture within Down syndrome, within autism culture. Those are part of cultures. There are professional cultures, there's healthcare culture, there's school culture. So there are multiple cultures. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about where these identities come in. And we're talking about the identities of people who've experienced oppression historically, who've been marginalized through history, right? And that is based on race, it's based on disability and ability status, can be based on economic status. So we see all of those coming together. Again, it causes it to be even more multiplied, that marginalization. And that's important that we look at that and not say, be prescriptive and say, hey, one size fits all. It means that we have to examine where all of these converge. I'm giving you an example from Zoe, who I mentioned, who's the mother of that child. And this is something that she shared with her. I'm going to share a quote that she gave us for our book. And it's really a beautiful example of intersections. She's talking right here about how she's had to advocate for her daughter and what the experience feels like when people encounter her as a Black woman. Here I am, angry Black woman, looking a certain way, not looking all delicate and not perceived to be that way by anybody. So yeah, she takes the lead. Now, if a situation arises where sometimes she needs angry Black women to come in and, you know, be angry, I jump on, of course. But people are more comfortable talking to her and, you know, dealing with her. And she comes from a place where, okay, I have some experience dealing with people with disabilities and what services are supposed to be provided and so on and so forth. So she comes in talking the lingo right away and they sit up. So this is where Zoe explains how she takes the backseat to her wife because her wife presents as white, even though she's Hispanic. But she's looking about how people interact with her and actually assign more power to her because they perceive her as being angry Black woman and having less power and less knowledge, even though she does. And that is a reality that we have to look at when we talk about intersectionality. Making all the difference. This is a book by Martha Minow from the 1990s. And it's talking about all the things that we might consider in our world and how society actually creates these barriers. So society is making these assumptions, right? It's saying that having a disability makes that person different from an established norm. Well, who said that? Who said that, right? Society says that. And it's been really portrayed throughout history that there's something wrong, right? And it's also saying that those differences show up in people instead of being part of the human presentation, right, is determined by someone who's objective and that is truth, right? Doesn't matter if other people are there to confirm it, but that person who's determined that that difference is there is telling the truth. It's also saying that there's a pervasive, unstated desire for the norm. And Martha Minow calls this the desire to go away. And as you hear people advocate for themselves, some of that starts to dissipate because some of that acceptance of who we are, saying there's nothing wrong with who we are, there's nothing wrong with how our children are. But the challenge is sometimes we need those labels that really can be very stigmatizing in order to access our services. And this is what we're talking about, is there is a dilemma. So we're advocating for services, accepting a label, right? But at the same time, understanding how stigmatizing that label can be, and sometimes really causing there to be judgment. So here is an example of how some of our families have really pushed back against that, right? And they've redefined normal. So this is Sonia speaking about her daughter. She's talking about her daughter and her daughter's blindness. And she says, it's what she has. It's her normal. So maybe it took some adjusting to get used to it, you know? How do we deal with it? How do we prepare her? It's her normal, you know? No vision. It's dark. It's all she knows. You know, she doesn't know that we see. So, you know, she goes about her likes and dislikes just like anyone else, right? She goes about her likes and dislikes just like anybody else. So this is, I love this quote because it's so powerful. It's speaking to how we may think of something as, hey, that's different, but it's normal. It's normal. And we don't like to use that word normal because, again, it can be so very stigmatizing, but it's something we have to be aware of how it's used and how we can take that back, right? And be empowering our families, empowering ourselves. Encountering communities. So I want to talk about inner work and outer work. It's very important to become co-advocates with families. So here's some questions that I always invite people to reflect upon. What are some examples of a co-advocacy and its challenges? And I know co-advocacy is a new word because we don't think about advocating along with someone. Very often our families are on their own to advocate for their children. And as we pass the baton, right, to our children, they're advocating for themselves. Maybe they're part of a disability support group where they can advocate together. Maybe they're enrolled in services that provide that advocacy support. But a lot of times, you know, you look at that as being alone, right? You're navigating, it's only your voice. But how could you be a co-advocate? How could you co-advocate along with someone? Let's come up with some goals together, right? The second question says, how does this align with our systems? So I give an example here of IDAs, the Individuals with Disabilities Education, right? How does our current educational system support advocacy? Does it, right? Is there a platform for advocacy? If you need special services, if you need healthcare, how does the system support you as an advocate? Finally, how does it differ across different contexts? So in a place where it's urban and you're in a city, that's going to look very different than where you are if you're rural and you're not very close to where services exist. If the nearest hospital, a therapy center is very, very far away from where you live, that's going to be a challenge for you if you have transportation issues. So it's going to be different in the different environments that you find yourselves. And so again, we can't say advocacy has to look the same because we may be advocating for different things. How does it differ for different disability diagnoses? That's a really, really important one. Because throughout history, even though the intent is very, very good, sometimes we forget, hey, what one person needs is different from what another person needs. So what a child with autism needs is going to be very different from what a child with Down syndrome needs. But there may be some things that are quite the same. And they may be the same as what a child needs who doesn't have a disability. It may just mean they just would like some childhood. They would like some play. They'd like to play sports. Is that any different from what any other child needs? No, but we're just looking at removing the barriers. We're looking at how we can make that possible in order to meet that family's expectation or that individual's expectation. So we have to make sure that we're making sure that it's aligned with what that family wants, what that individual wants, what that student wants when they come of age to advocate for themselves. And finally, which is aligned with our theme today, how does it differ for people with intersecting identities? So just because someone has a disability diagnosis, right, doesn't mean they stop having their cultural identity, right? How does it look for a Black boy with Down syndrome, right? And a person who's not Black with Down syndrome, because they're carrying another identity along with them. It's not like one identity doesn't show up, right? You're seeing the whole person. And so that's something we have to understand is when you are in your social spaces, your experience of people and how people engage you and interact with you may be different. It may require a different type of advocacy. Again, we don't want to remove anyone's identity and say, hey, I don't want that to show up here. It's one size fits all. We have to be mindful of what those experiences are and making sure that we're supporting people and meeting them where they are. Finally, co-advocacy means commitment to work that is never complete. I want to pause there for a second because it isn't a destination, it's a journey. It's a journey that's going to continue across the lifespan. Today, we may be advocating for assistive technology in the classroom, but later on, we're advocating for assistive technology for communication, right? For work supports, right? Or for later on in life, right? To access medications. Don't know what we're going to need to be an advocate for. We never know that, but we always have to make the adjustment to shift, right? To pivot for what's needed. It's always going to be changing. And it's going to call upon you to be an agent or co-agent of change. I keep putting that co because it means with. Being an agent of change isn't enough. You need a team of support with you. Even if you have one person in your corner, you've got a team. One person who believes in you, one person who respects your ideals and your goals. So you can be that co-agent of change with families, adults, students, and communities. And finally, I want to thank you for giving me your attention today in speaking about things that are very personal to me as a mother, right? As a mother of a son who will grow up and will be navigating these challenges as we are now as a family. I thank you for spending time with me and sharing pictures of my son, who is a Black boy with Down syndrome and navigating his world. And as I work alongside him, that's also very special to me. And I'd like to close out by sharing a poem with you that I wrote for my son. The name of this poem is called Free. I remember the time when I held you in my arms. It was a stranger who said, blessed are we. I looked down in wonder and awe and asked, who are you, little one? What will you do to me? Seems as if we're always at the crossroads. The next step neither one of us can see. I only know I will fight for you always, no matter what is said by the powers that be. I know what's inside of you, potential, the power to change, transform every bit of dignity. I only hold your hand as your partner, but it's you who have come to set us free. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to ask, well, first of all, I like how you say exactly how each culture is different and all that, and how like an autistic person is different than a Down syndrome, and how they may have similar connections, but like it's the same thing with like the blind and the deaf. And yeah, like, I mean, obviously I'm white, and I mean, I don't know what kind of culture you'd call me, because I'm more like a Heinz 57, but for my instance, I'm visually impaired. And so what I deal with every day is the simple fact of I read and spell at a second grade level. I battle, like, I'm totally technology illiterate. and trying to get through this whole COVID thing and doing tons of stuff on Zoom, still trying to figure out where my support group is, what I can get access to, all the things that are changing on me, the transportation, funding, like each person, like I have, for instance, a bone spur, but I can't afford inserts because they basically make it impossible for me to budget that in. Right now I'm loving the food stamps, but it's just not going to help me in some areas, you know? So for me, I've been feeling kind of lost because I can't reach out and get the same things I used to, like a senior companion. It's a guess if I get groceries, if I can get to the doctor's office or whatever. So I would just like to change. We need to start changing this fact so that we can get back to normal.
Thank you for, Dr. Ocasio-Stoutenburg, did you want to respond?
No, I want to say thank you for sharing your experience and knowing that there are so many things that you're expected to navigate at the same time, which makes it really, really hard. I always say that the pandemic has really magnified some things that were already existing for people. Already barriers that were already there are now even heightened. But again, that makes it so much more important to have good support systems, folks who can step up with you and be that voice for the different systems that you have to navigate at the same time. And don't be afraid to reach out to whoever you need, even if that may be multiple people, a team of people to support you. And I wish you all the best for you. We all do. That you can get through this.
There is a question in the chat that I thought I would read. It's by Olivia, and she said, "Thank you for this presentation. As the mother of a Black boy with a disability, have you had to navigate conversations about identities with your son? How do you plan to have these conversations with him?"
I haven't had conversations with him yet about the intersections of his identity yet. He's 11, and now he is at a point where he does recognize his own place in the world. He's able to, he doesn't use his voice to communicate, but that doesn't, he isn't always communicating with us. So he lets us know how he wants to show up in the world. And I was saying the other day, we were going to the ear, nose, and throat physician, and he picked out his own outfit. He made sure it was coordinating. He made sure his chain was showing. He didn't want to crease his sneakers. He asked for cologne. And I know some people would say, hey, well, who cares? I mean, all kids do that. But it's so meaningful to me because it shows me he cares about how he shows up in the world, and he's expressing himself, his culture, his likes, his preferences. And I want to really, really reinforce that as he goes on, that he gets to choose. He gets to choose. So I really think that's very, very important for all of our kids to make sure that their choices, their identity, how they present, how they show up is beautiful. And all people with disabilities are just a beautiful expression of who we are as human beings.
Hi, I would like to, well, I guess my question I have would be, when you talk about, I guess for me, I understand intersectionality from 2, almost 3 parts, as being somebody who is not only visually impaired, who is on the autism spectrum and other things, but I'm also a part of community. And one question I have is, what do you think about, I've seen some positive ways about putting intersectionality out there, and I've seen some very negative ways of like some people that will want to push different types of agendas to the point that it pushes other groups out, and how to look at things equally. Because I guess for me, I've looked at it as I've been trying to fight for like years and years about trying to like show specifically how you kind of, as a person who is intersectional, have your foot in one kind of, you have your foot in the door of one door of each group, but you're not completely a whole part of it. One side of the group understands, you know, like for example, the LGBT side understands that part of myself, and then the other part is the disabled side understands that, but neither group understand each other. And I've always wanted to try and get groups to kind of understand each other in a very positive way, not a pointing the finger as one group is, you know, more oppressed than other, or one group is whatever. As far as that goes, that both groups can kind of come together and look at each other as kind of complement each other rather than being divisive. I don't know. What is your thoughts on that?
I think, David, you raised a great point, is that we, in the fight, in the plight for being valued for our services, for the things that we need, it does tend to become divisive, right? The conversations, because it seems like as if we're all fighting for a limited resource, which is to be valued, to be respected, to have the things that we need. We can all converge, and we do all have similar goals that we have, but at the same time, our social experiences may be different. And this is a problem when we have folks who are experiencing oppression in different ways. That sometimes we want to say, hey, I have it harder than you. Hey, you have it harder than me. The important thing to note is that we don't separate our identities, right? We don't stop. When I come in and I advocate for my son, it's not like, hey, I stopped being a Black Latino woman with Cherokee heritage, right? I am still who I am, but I'm still showing up for him. Do I think that people make judgments on people, how they are presenting? Yes. And so it makes us have to have a different kind of voice. Until we can, again, explore our own biases and assumptions about each other and truly work together collaboratively, it tends to become an issue, even with the absolute good intents that people have. But again, we have to find ways to collaborate, to listen to each other, value each other's experiences, not minimize what anyone is going through, and find ways in which we can really come together and unite with a common voice, but also with our multiple voices.
Yeah, that's what I agree to too, is that really that I think that there's, I mean, with the political divide we have today with identity politics as a whole, it is very, very tough because there's a lot of different ways of looking at it that I have seen. One person I follow in particular who has written a few books on the subject. His name is Jonathan Haidt, and the way he has pointed out how we should be able to look at identity politics as not trying to separate people, but more into trying to bring people together. And again, like try and look at it as a whole rather than trying to divide us. And so that, yeah, that's kind of how I've looked at it, and have tried to say, hey, instead of us being in our little own cloistered worlds, because that seems like that's how so much of the world seems to be, as everybody's in their tribalistic view. Yeah, we need to come together.